Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of stories in the rain, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This story was when I was younger and braver, and did kind of stupid stuff without thinking. I used to work at a pizza shop down the street. From 2 PM they're closed. I usually didn't get off until 11 or so at night. I had a car, but was close enough to walk, so I did that most days to save gas. This particular night I was doing my usual thing, jamming to one of my playlists, tired but happy to have a good job and just generally happy with the way my life was going. Up ahead about a block from my place, I see an attractive guy in dark clothing walking, but not with a purpose really. He was taller than me, maybe 5'10", and had long, shaggy brown hair. The closer I got to him, the more I could tell he really was good looking. "How's your night going?" "It's good, just looking to get a bit drunk." Like even in the dark of night, I was starting to get excited. His features escape me now, but I remember his hair and thick eyebrows, and I took an earbud out because I'm from a dangerous city, and never really cared about stranger danger, and decided to talk to him, maybe even flirt a little. "How's your night going?" "It's good, just looking to get drunk." "Oh, that I can help with. I've got a mini bar at my place. I live just down the street." During the walk back to my place, I got no red flags from this guy. He seemed totally normal, and I was honestly thinking, wow, just through sheer luck I met this super hunky guy and he seems cool and fun. We get to my apartment on the second floor. I jump into host mode and offer him a seat and make him comfortable. The apartment is about 640 square feet, so it's very small except for the bathroom. I head to the kitchen, and while I'm pouring drinks I glance back over at him, and that's when I notice the first red flag. As I was asking him questions, he's more delayed with his answers, especially more so than just on the walk here. It was odd to me. I go back over to the couch, pass him his drink, and sit down next to him. "So what do you do for work?" I asked. "Oh, I'm not here, just for pleasure." He puts the drink down on the table. "What do you mean? I'm not after that either." He stands up. "What you got?" he asks me. His nice guy vernacular and friendly face are gone now, and I'm having a hard time processing what he means by this. "I said what you got." The second I stand up, he pushes me back. I fly across the room, hitting the floor, but not hard enough to pass out. I get right back up, but he's already grabbed my laptop and my work bag, and I start towards him. He cuts around me and makes his way towards the front door. I'm right behind him when he makes it outside and manage to grab hold of him, and we tussle in the front door. Now I shout out, calling on help from the neighbors. It's late at night, so no one comes. And I'm shouting, "Please help, I'm being robbed." The thing is, he has my laptop, and it's not just any laptop. I hate to admit it, but my entire life was on the laptop at that time. Important photos I didn't have backed up, thousands of dollars of music programs, video games, programming stuff for a development team I helped, really expensive software. It was, in my mind, irreplaceable. I give chase down the stairs across the dog park, and as I gain on him, we tussle again, and the only thing I can focus on is my laptop. I knew that I had to, at any cost, retrieve it. Somehow I get a grip on it, tug it again, and I guess he decides I'm not worth all of this struggle. He gets up and starts to take off. I now realize he still has my work bag with my cell phone and wallet, license, debit card, AAA card. I take off towards him again. This time he shouts back at me, "Follow me and I'll stab you again." This makes me stop in my tracks and he gets away. Underneath the street lamp along the sidewalk, I immediately inspect myself. Was I stabbed? There's no way. Then I see blood running down my leg. I see blood on my arm, 2 places where he cut me good. I'm scared, but the blood makes it look worse than it is. I decide that's enough. I got my laptop and that's all I really wanted anyway. I hobble back home and get inside and lock my door. I called the cops using my neighbor's friend's phone, and the next day filed a police report explaining the situation and showing the stab wounds and declining medical services that I couldn't afford. So all the guy got was a crappy cell phone and a wallet with like 30 to 40 bucks in it. The cops called my friend back several days later and said they were not able to find the guy and that he would keep me posted. That was years ago, so I don't know where the robber is now. But I have every electronic thing of importance backed up on multiple drives to this day. This started around my sophomore year in high school. I began getting creepy texts and phone calls, but never really thought much of them, since in those days prank calls were commonplace. The messages and calls would come in constantly for a few weeks, and would then stop after a while. I honestly would forget that they had even happened until they'd start back up again. Around my junior year, the calls began getting creepier. They would call my house number along with my cell phone. This was around the time cell phones were starting to get popular, so while some of my older friends still had my house number, it wasn't something I would give out to people anymore. When I began dating, they began calling my then boyfriend, and would tell him awful things about me, and sometimes even know where I was at the time, and ask him questions regarding my whereabouts. It caused a lot of issues between us, but again they would stop after a while, and apart from wondering who it could be, I never thought much of them again. Fast forward to college. I stopped talking to a lot of my friends from high school, even deleted my MySpace accounts and cleared friends from Facebook because I wanted a fresh start. I was still dating the same guy, but really stopped having contact with most of the people I knew from high school. Halfway through my freshman year, the calls and text messages started again, this time with even more personal details about my life. Like always, right before I considered them suspicious enough to report them, they would cease, and I would slowly forget they'd even happened. Sophomore year, I moved out of the dorms and into an apartment with 3 girls I'd met the year before. One night I started getting the usual texts again, but this time they were threatening to Photoshop nude pictures of me to send out to people I knew. I tried ignoring them, but the texts wouldn't stop. I would block one number, and they would come back from a different one almost immediately. I got really creeped out, and decided to change my number the next day. At this point I wasn't sure who it could be, but I had become paranoid and stopped trusting anyone except my boyfriend. I isolated myself from friends and began spiraling into depression. I sometimes was sure it was so-and-so from high school, but could never come up with proof of anything. Fast forward a few months and I'm at a concert with my boyfriend. He'd got drunk that night and we'd gotten into a huge fight over it. I was home with my parents that weekend and got in at around midnight. At 2 a.m, the calls to my house started coming in. One after another, we were getting calls from men asking for my special services. We tried blocking calls like before. It was just different numbers one after another. Finally, we just unplugged the phone. The next morning I had to explain to my parents what had been going on for years, and together we made a report and changed our landline number. Turns out someone had put my phone number on Craigslist and listed me as a sex worker. I finally began realizing that my boyfriend had been the one constant during most of these incidents, and that our drunk fight that night could not have been a coincidence with my number being posted on Craigslist. It took a few tries for me to leave the relationship. He was very manipulative, and I had spent years isolating myself from friendships and trusting only him. That summer though, I finally left him, and chose to forget all the things that had ever happened. It took me a while to be healthy enough to start dating again, but when I did, I met a wonderful guy who's now my husband. I mentioned what happened before, and thankfully was emotionally distant enough from it that we just commented on how awful that had been, and moved on. Last year, however, I began getting the text messages again. I had a new phone, new number, a new friend circle, and I blocked anyone associated with the ex-boyfriend, and trusted the people in my life not to hand out my number to anyone, so I was afraid when it started again. Thankfully, this time I had my wonderful husband with me, after it happened a few times where I would get text messages only when I was with my husband, and the texts insinuated that I had been cheating on him. We decided that we weren't going to take the chance that it was coincidence. We hoped that we weren't being followed, but the timing of the contact of the messages were obviously meant to cause a fight between us. we decided to make another police report, this time citing my ex-boyfriend as a suspect, and once again changed my number and limited the people who even had it. Since then, I'm happy to say that I haven't got a single unknown call or message. The detective assigned to my case attempted to contact my ex-boyfriend, but was never able to. In any case, I think he realized that this time I was serious about pursuing legal action against him, and he stopped. I was lucky that this was the case because technically I didn't have proof it had been him. Anonymous harassment is actually really difficult to pursue legally for many reasons, so thankfully approaching him was enough to stop. When I think about this experience now, I realize how disturbed and manipulative the guy really was. I have no proof that the prank calls I got before I met him were him, but if I think about how I met him, I just think it looks so planned. Even then, it seemed like something out of a Nicholas Spark movie. I hope that those calls were a coincidence, but I really never knew how far the guy went with his stalking of me. I'm just glad to be out of that relationship and emotionally healthy again. When I was about 4 years old, my parents got divorced. They were constantly at each other's throats because they were both extremely narcissistic and had addiction issues. When they finally split, my mother completely banned me from seeing him, no contact or visiting or anything. It had been maybe a year since seeing my dad. This of course will make any parent lose their mind, but he took it to an extreme. He began stalking our family, followed us to the grocery store or just having his car parked outside our house to watch us. Of course, I was too young to know what was happening, so I wasn't informed until I was older. My mum eventually got a restraining order, and things seemed to go quiet and calmer. My cousins came from out of state to visit, and were staying the night at our house. Me and my cousin Anna were pretty much inseparable, so naturally we stayed up all night. One night at maybe 1 a.m., we decided to sneak out of our room and go play on our computer in the basement. As we headed down there, we kept whispering and laughing so we could definitely be heard if someone was nearby. Once we were in the basement and start to head to the computer which was around the corner, I'm suddenly overcome with a sense of someone watching us, and I'm filled with pure fear. I shushed my cousin, even though she was 2 years older, because she saw how serious I looked. I looked in front of us and opened a window that was at ground level. Suddenly I sensed exactly where the person was, and somehow I knew who it was. I turned to the computer desk and said, "Dad?" And I saw him, my dad, come up from under the desk. Even though I sensed him there, I was still shocked that I was right, and completely terrified because I knew this wasn't right. He shouldn't be in the house. He looked at me and only said, "Don't tell your mother." And then he crawled back out the window. I was so scared, but I didn't hesitate to run upstairs and get my mum. She passed out drunk, so she didn't wake when I called her name. I jumped up on the bed and started shaking her. She woke up finally, and I began crying and telling her that Dad was in the house, and he told me not to tell you. Since my mum has been an alcoholic for decades, she was a functional drunk, and she was able to sober up really quickly and call the police. My heart was still racing when the police came to the house. When the policeman started asking me questions, I got so scared that I fainted right there, and have no memory of what happened after I woke up. Years later, I was told by my brother he had a similar experience. He woke up one night with a strange feeling, and caught my dad trying to put something in my mum's vodka bottle. After that, my dad was arrested. I still have no idea how I knew my dad was there and that it was him. I still get nightmares pretty much nightly of my father. And I do make sure all the windows are locked every single night. I had something happen to me in a grocery store. I was only there to get a few items, but they were all across the store, when right away I noticed this guy was following me around staring at me. He definitely wasn't taking anything from the shelves where I was shopping, but no matter which aisle I went to, he was there. I decided to cut it short and didn't see him, so I dashed to checkout when he appears right behind me in line with nothing in his hands, smiling at me and acting nervous. I was more irritated than anything. I was digging for my points card when he tried to hand the checkout woman his. "No thank you," I snapped. I would prefer to use my own, and glared at him thinking he would get the memo, but he didn't. He proceeds to follow me to my car, and to try to help me load my groceries in the trunk. "I don't need your help. I didn't ask you," I snapped at him, being extremely aggressive in my body language and refusing to talk or look at him while I'm loading the bags into the trunk. He continued to stand and stare. Finally, I slam my trunk shut, face him and cross my arms and say, "What do you want?" "I was hoping to get your number." "You followed me all the way through the grocery store staring at me, didn't even buy anything, and now you follow me out to the store parking lot? To my car? Do you have any idea how creepy that is? And now you want my phone number? You don't know me. I have a boyfriend, and no, you can't have it." The creep wasn't deterred in the slightest. "But I want to take you out." "Did you just listen to a word I said?" "Yeah, but are you married? He's just your boyfriend. You probably don't even have one, you're just saying that." He says this while he gets closer to me. "What do I have to do to get your number?" "You need to back away from me right now," I said. "I have a boyfriend, and even if I didn't, I said no. One thing about me is that I look like a little blonde girl next door type, but on the inside, I'm nothing like that. And it really irritates me when I say no to someone and they try and take it as a challenge. I was a punk rocker for years. I no longer dress the part because I have a corporate job in fashion, and when I'm in a dress I get a lot of unwanted attention. I also have a very mean and scary voice when I need to use it. I'm beyond dumbfounded at this point. We're just staring at each other, but at the same time I'm getting the mace out my purse. What don't you understand about the word no? If you don't get away from me right now, I'm gonna mace you in the face. I pull it out and flip the switch. He continues to stand and stare. "I just want your phone number, please." So I started backing away around the car into my driver door, continue to point the mace at him, and as soon as I get my door open, I jump in and lock the doors and get my car running. He's still standing there staring at me. He blocked my way from being able to pull out, so I proceeded to slow back, and I'm gonna back into him if he doesn't move. Finally, that gets his attention and he steps aside, and the last possible second, and I squeal out of the parking lot livid. Later, I was telling my boyfriend about it, and he said I should create a dating application and put my junk email at the top, just to hand it to these creeps and tell them I'll get you back. Which really helped me calm down, because we were laughing about what kind of questions would be on there, and the thought of what it would be like to do something like that. Because this is even... I'm at university now, but staying with my parents at their house for the summer. I was hanging out with one of my friends and we decided to go to a party. I met this guy around my age and we were talking and having fun, but it was nothing too serious. We exchanged phone numbers, hung out a few times, but he became incredibly clingy right from the start, so I decided to distance myself from him in the hopes that he would get the hint and back off. But he didn't. When I stopped responding, he sent me over 100 messages, each one becoming increasingly more aggressive as time went by. Keep in mind, it had been less than 2 weeks since we first met, and I finally responded and told him he needed to chill out. He appeared to calm down a bit after I responded, but he then asked for a phone call. I agreed and we talked for a while. He told me he couldn't stop thinking about me, that I was the best thing that ever happened to him. Just a bunch of stuff that is way too intense to say to someone you barely know. I tried to let him down gently, reminding him that I was only home for the summer and wasn't looking for anything serious beyond a fling, but this made him only angrier. He started yelling at me, insulting me, calling me easy, and basically a complete 180 from what we had been saying mere minutes ago. Then all of a sudden the phone went silent, and after a pause he said in a quiet voice, "You better get ready, 'cause I'm coming over for you." And then he hung up. This was very frightening, because he knew my parents were out of town for the week, and that I was staying at their house alone. However, he didn't know where my parents' house was, because I was always the one driving, and he didn't know my friend either. So I thought he had no way of figuring it out, since, again, I'm normally living at school in another state. Regardless, I lock all the doors and shut the blind just in case. After a while, maybe an hour or so, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I looked at my phone and saw a notification on my lock screen. It was from the Ring app, indicating there had been movement on my parents' camera. It was him. You could clearly see him with something in his hand. When he noticed the camera, however, he left. I immediately blocked him on everything and reported the incident. I have no idea what he planned to do once he got here. It was terrifying to realize that he'd even come over when I was asleep and defenseless and unaware of his presence. As I would later find out, he was able to get my address from my phone number. Apparently he googled it and returned my dad's name as the owner of the phone number, along with my parents' address. Since I am on my parents' phone plan, I guess it shows up I still live here. This revelation was horrifying, as I never knew my phone number could reveal my home address. I'm still extremely upset that this kind of private information is on the internet for anyone. That is incredibly dangerous to find and give away. Please learn from my mistakes and do not give your phone number out to anyone unless you trust them. I found out that you can get a free Google Voice number to text and call people, and that number can't be tracked back to you so easily. My advice is for anyone you meet online or informally, give them a disposable number. I still can't sleep at night. Hopefully this never happens to anyone else. This happened several times at this point, when I was cleaning the house at midnight. My husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, worked nights, so I adjusted to his schedule. I usually kept the blinds open during the day, and would go around closing them at night when I tidied up before bed. Our room was the last stop on the first night this happened. The curtains and blinds were open, and as I was sweeping the floor, I felt the sensation of being watched. I looked around me when my eyes focused on the silver sedan parked outside my house, mostly on the grass of my front lawn. My bedroom window is about 15 yards from the road in front of my house. It's a small front yard in a pretty densely populated neighborhood. I saw the car before I saw them. I'm not sure, but there was clearly someone sitting in the driver's seat of the car, and another person standing about 5 yards from my window staring at me. The only reason I could see this is because the moon was fairly bright that night. I shrieked and dropped to the floor and crawled to the night switch to turn it off so that I couldn't be seen. And I called my husband and asked him what to do. Call the cops, he said. So I did. By the time they arrived, the car was gone. They asked if they could see my security footage and I agreed, but the footage from that section of time was just gone. It skipped over the few minutes that they would have been outside. This has happened several times since then, and I'm completely given up on calling the police, as I feel as if they think I'm crazy. I have no proof this is happening, but I would like to have some opinions as to what they may be doing. In the past 16 months, it's happened at least 10 times. Sometimes the person is standing in the yard, sometimes they aren't. Also, the car has been different every single time, but the light is always on inside the cabin of the vehicle when I go to look, and the people inside are never looking where I can see their faces. I run to grab my phone to call someone, but they'll already be gone. Can someone help me? I don't even understand what kind of stalkers I'm dealing with here. This happened in the late 90s. Me, Catherine, and my friend Rose were both teenagers. The guy we met was on the bus one day coming home from my volunteer work after school. We were on the bus, going home, laughing and talking, when this guy randomly sits by us and begins chatting to us as well. He says his name was Jay. We talked a bit more and innocently gave him our names, and he asked for my number, but I said no. He was like 7 years older, and it was kind of strange the more we spoke to him. He got annoyed, but whatever, and we thought that was it. After a few days, the same friend runs into Jay while switching buses downtown. I was going to her house like I did a few times a week when we run into him. He asked for me to hang out and watch him play hockey that night, and I said no. I was going to go see my friend. He got weirdly annoyed and kept trying and bragging to me, telling me about how much fun it would be and trying to get me away from my friend. He didn't really want her to come to this hockey game either, just for it to be him and I. Our bus finally came and we got out of there fast. Over the next few weeks I kept running into him downtown. It was like he knew my schedule, and every time I tried to be nice but to get away as fast as possible, and every time he would get annoyed because I wouldn't hang out. A few weeks pass and I'm at school and in walks Jay. I was so mad and frustrated that I snapped at him. Why was he here? How did he know which school I went to? Did he follow me on the city bus? He tried to tell me that he was there to see his friends, but he wasn't with anyone. He was just a 25-year-old dude wandering around a high school. After that, I would randomly see him on my bus, and he would always try and sit across from me and watch. He would still ask for us to hang out, and I would always say no. As time went on, he would still find me on the bus and sit across from me, with who I guessed was his girlfriend or a girl he was trying to make me jealous with. He would look at me while making out with her, and would always do everything he could to make me feel uncomfortable. I would either turn my music up or do my best to ignore him and sit elsewhere, but nothing ever seemed to deter him. He never did anything bad enough to call the police, but he knew it was wrong, and he knew it bothered me, and I knew I would have a panic attack, and I'm sure he would get off on that. As the years went by, I would see him less and less. He would randomly pop up and make me uncomfortable. He would start standing really close to me and try to talk. I would have a panic attack and do my best to ignore him. I would still walk away, and he'd get ever more pushy. Every time I would run into him, I would text my friend Rose, and she would help me calm down. The year is now 2023, 24 years later, and I haven't seen him in at least the last 8, and I'm praying that I never see him again. Though I have seen him a few times and panicked, and I'm still scared to run into him. When I was a kid, my mum worked as a teacher, and she was very close to a co-worker of hers called Kathy, who had a son around my age. When my mum or her friend would head out for the night, the other would take care of us, and basically, it meant I spent half my time over their house, and my friend Marcus half the time at mine, which was perfect and fun for us. We lived in different cities, but since that kind of system had been going on pretty much since forever, I grew up knowing my friend's city almost as well as I knew my own. His mum was well aware of that, so that being said, whenever we were going on a walk in the area, she'd let us wander around because she knew we'd always find our way back. My mum was a bit more cautious and always kept an eye on us though, as she'd always walk behind us to make sure she was always able to see us. I just wish her friend would have done the same. One day when I was around 6 or 7, we were going on a walk with my friend Marcus and his mum Katty. It was a very sunny day, and I was wearing a dress with embroidered flowers, and I had my blonde long hair down. I often heard I was a pretty kid, even from strangers on the street, and beside making me and my parents somewhat uncomfortable, nothing bad ever happened. During that walk, Kathy was walking dead ahead of us, and I was chatting and fooling around with Marcus, when he suddenly remembered something urgent to tell his mum. He ran up to her and left me strolling behind for a few minutes. That time though, we were circling around a big campsite, and we walked by white vans and camping cars. One of those vans had its back doors open, and there was a man in his 40s smoking a cigarette and leaning onto the vehicle. His eyes locked with me, and then I saw Kathy and Marcus weren't paying much attention to me, as they were already a fair distance ahead. He then proceeds to pull me by the arm close, and I found my body touching his. I was so weirded out I didn't even say a word, although I knew Kathy would have heard me if I called for help. He leaned towards me and he was obviously much taller than I was, muttering something I didn't understand. He winked at me and kissed me on the lips and then pulled me to the open doors of his van. At this point, if he had pushed me just a little, I would have fallen into the truck. I was too scared to even lift a finger, and even though I didn't understand everything that was going on, I knew it wasn't okay. He puts his hands on the doors as to close the vehicle, and I felt my heart sink. At that exact moment, some other man jogged towards us in his 40s, waving hello to me and saying something along the lines of, "I lost sight of you for a bit. I was so scared." He had a very friendly look on his face and was staring at me with great insistence and a huge reassuring smile. And the van man awkwardly laughed and yanked me out of the way of the car, slamming the doors shut. I ran to Cathy as I heard the van go off and just acted as if nothing had happened. To this day I never told that story to anyone, not Marcus nor Cathy, not to my mum, no one. I'm 22 years old. So to the friendly guy who obviously didn't lose sight of me or whatever, but probably saw everything and wanted to interfere, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'm sure that guy would have abducted me. Who the hell feels comfortable enough to kiss a strange kid in public in broad daylight? But everyone thinks the same thing as I do, and I wish you hell. About 6 or 7 years ago, my family of 9 moved into this new house closer to town. I was around 14 to 15, just starting my freshman year of high school. We didn't know much about the neighborhood, except that it was right next to a nice big Catholic church. Like, nice. The church is so close that you can actually see it from the yard and walk to it in a couple of minutes from the house. So we thought it was a nice, quiet neighborhood. Well, one morning I'm getting ready with my siblings to go to school. Our neighbors we had at the time were a little weird. We didn't know much about them, but they hated that we had dogs that barked a lot, 2 white German shepherds that we had rescued a few years back. So there were a few times he had threatened to shoot them, which led to us giving them away because we were afraid of their safety and the police couldn't do anything on a threat alone. I had only seen the neighbor once or twice, and he was a rough-looking dude. I'm guessing he was in his late 40s, very skinny as if he did meth or something. I was the first one out the door that morning, to wait by the car that was in the driveway. I was standing about 3 feet from the road because I was walking around and waiting for everyone else. The only other person outside was my 12-year-old sister, who was behind the gate. As I was just walking back and forth at the end of the driveway, the neighbor's car came speeding down the road and started to slow down when he saw me. Keep in mind, I didn't know everything about this guy that I do now. I didn't know about the level of creepy he was. I just saw him as one of the neighbors. My parents didn't tell us about the reason why we had to give away our dogs at the time, and I was a very ignorant and clueless child. So he slows down, smiling at me when his car came to a stop, only a few feet from where I was standing. He then pulled out a bag, just like a plastic bag that looked like it had something in it. It also looked like it was bagged a few times over. He told me it was for my little brother, who liked to play basketball. We had a basketball hoop in our yard, and I asked what it was. He told me it was a basketball. Right away I got this incredibly sick feeling in my stomach, and at the time I didn't know why, but the feeling I got from this guy made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. He asked me to come get it so I could give it to my brother, and I was hesitant, because if it was just a basketball, why did he have so many bags around it? So I asked if he could just throw it over, and around this time my little sister that was outside with me had gone, so I told my mum that there was someone outside. When he saw my sister leave, he started to get out of his car. Before the man could say anything to my mum, she'd come out the front door and was standing at the porch, asking the neighbor what he was doing, and without saying anything he jumped back into his car and floored it down the street. I can't imagine what would have happened if my sister hadn't have told my mum, or even been outside to see what was happening. To this day, it still gives me chills. We never saw him again after that, and he moved away a few months later. Back in 2018, I was living in the suburbs of Paris and had been playing Pokemon Go since its release 2 years earlier. I used to go out to play at night, always with my best friend on voice call. It was like any other night, following my usual route. It was around 2 AM and I had already covered a good 2 kilometers. I found myself about 1 kilometer away from home, standing near a Pokestop, catching what I could while talking to my best friend, just like every night. It was a residential street with a few streetlights, but quite dark, as there was a field just behind it. After about 5 minutes, I noticed a man in his 30s on the opposite sidewalk, just a few meters away from me, holding head shears in his hand, and there were a pile of branches at his feet. I thought the man was just trimming the branches of the tree. However, when I described the scene to my friend, he told me to leave right away, as no one does gardening in the middle of the night. Despite my friend's warning, I was so focused on playing Pokemon that I wanted to capture all the ones in the area before leaving, so I stayed while keeping an eye on the man's actions. As I looked at the man, I realized he wasn't cutting any branches, he was only staring at me. He would occasionally move and hide behind a parked van nearby while spying on me through the windows. However, he knew very well that I could see him, and I began to feel scared. Despite my friend pleading for me to leave, I still hadn't caught all the Pokemon, so I hesitated to go. The man continued his strange behavior, crossing over to my side of the street and hiding behind some bushes while staring at me. Then he went back to his pile of branches and stared at me again. Finally, I'd had enough and decided to leave. I walked normally towards my home, trying not to show any fear. I had a straight path back home. My friend on the call asked me to check behind me in case the man was following me, and indeed he was still holding the head shears, about 10 meters behind. I then made a left turn instead of going straight, even though it made my route longer. I just wanted to be sure that he was following me, and that it wasn't a coincidence. He continued to follow, so I picked up the pace, taking snaps just in case something happened. When I reached the end of the street, I was out of breath but safe, and there was no one behind me. I entered my home feeling relieved, when suddenly a white car pulled up right in front. It stopped, and the driver's window rolled down. It was the man with the pruning shears. Now he knew where I lived. I rushed inside, locked everything, and grabbed a kitchen knife, and waited until someone woke up so I could go to bed. There were no further incidents. No one believed me, so we checked the surveillance cameras at home, and unfortunately, I was right. When I was 12, I went to a summer camp/internship thing at an oceanography institute. I don't want to say which one, but I will say that the research for the institute is to learn about oceanography. The town nearby is a famous touristy beach town, so once a week the counsellors would drive us to the town and let us shop around for a few hours. They would not chaperone during these trips, but we had to be in groups of at least 6 for safety. In my group of friends there were 3 boys and 3 girls. Us girls wanted to buy some bras at the nearby lingerie store. The boys were fine with this, but didn't want to go to the store, so they waited out front. Apparently, 2 older guys walked up to the store while we were in there. Here's a rough script of what transpired. "Where are your parents?" "We're part of summer camp, we aren't with them." "Well, where are your counsellors?" "They're on the common." "Why are you standing outside a lingerie store?" "We're waiting for our friends." "So there's unaccompanied girls in there?" And before my friend could answer, the 2 creeps ran in the store. I get a frantic call from my friend telling us to exit out the back door because 2 creepy guys ran inside. We rushed out and they explained what happened. We went to our counsellors, who called everyone back to the common, and we ended the trip early. I don't know if they were intending to harm us or not, but it was definitely sketchy and made everyone feel very uncomfortable. In high school, I was a band nerd. During the time of this story, I was a sophomore, 15-year-old female, and was on my 2nd year as a majorette. I had previously played an instrument, but found my way to a baton at some point. Because the band was pretty well respected, we often had music majors from the local college interning with our band director. This year we had 3, a 20-something woman working with flagline, a 24-year-old dude working the drum line, and a 25-year-old working as an assistant band director/intern. They started working with our group at the end of summer during band camp, so we became somewhat familiar with them fairly early into the year. That's how the whole band knew that the flag intern and band director intern were actually engaged to be married. that teens do, we thought it was super romantic. Not long after the start of the school year, the band director in turn was also trying to be cool with all the teens, joking around and being relatable. I can't remember his last name, but his first name was Brian. Overall, he seemed charming and safe in a very stereotypical nerd kind of way, and his fiancée was always nearby. I started to feel a mixture of special and uncomfortable when Brian began focusing a little more attention on me specifically. At first, I wrote it off as him choosing to speak with me as the majorette captain, a bit of a near-peer authority position. My 15-year-old brain reasoned. The discomfort started to become squirmy when he offered me his phone number if I ever needed anything. I knew for certain that he hadn't offered this to any other section leaders, so this was a choice that singled me out. After that point, things rapidly moved into a place that made me feel less special and more targeted. It was hard to remember a lot of the specifics. I have vague memories of avoiding him on away game bus rides and asking why Tanya, the fiancée, wasn't riding the same bus. More vagueness around avoiding him during and after practice, and feeling a little concerned at times, and eventually outright declining some kind of romantic invitations. I can't remember when he started mentioning how pretty I was, or how I needed to be careful wearing such short shorts during practice. I do remember dreading the first time I had to wear our skimpy majorette uniform with him around. The previous experience had taught me to not be quiet about this. I had started by joking and alerting friends about the escalating focus on attention, then by telling my then senior class sister that he was saying increasingly creepy and inappropriate things. It was only a few days after I told my sister that the final incident with Brian occurred. A few times during the weeks of band camp, he had offered to give me a ride home, which I always declined. It was unnecessary, but also previous experience. So I knew I had never given him an address, which is why it was the height of scary and creepy when his car pulled up beside me one Sunday as I was walking down the road in front of my house. Alarm bells were clanging. I curtly asked him what he was doing there, and he claimed he was just in the area, unlikely given it was a residential-only area that's quite hard to find and very rural. I asked if he knew this is where I lived, and he surprisingly admitted he did. Backing away from the road into the grassy tree-lined ditch, I remember consciously not smiling. I flatly responded with, "No, please go," when he offered me a ride. Not wanting to give any indication of where my house was, I moved further into the tree cover and began walking away. Thankfully, my grandfather, an old-school tech head, so I had a bulky cell phone in my pocket, and immediately dialed my sister and filled her in. Bless her. She was revving the 1982 engine of her 280Z hatchback for all it's worth when she pulled up. Creepy Brian had been slowly cruising back and forth along the strip of country road where I had camouflaged myself in the trees. As soon as I heard my sister's engine, I headed back towards the road, where I found her stopped in the oncoming traffic lane, shouting through her lowered passenger window at this grown man. Her face in that moment is etched into my memory. I immediately felt safer. Remembering that look still makes me feel warm and secure. I gave his car a wide berth as my sister moved forward to give me access to the passenger door. Pulling a three-pointer, she again stopped by his car to let him know she would call the school, the police, the university, and my grandfather if he didn't turn his happy ass around and get off our road. We followed his car back to the highway and watched him drive far enough away to feel comfortable to return home. She and I both reported all of the creepy and questionable behavior to the band director and school officials. She had connections in the music department of the university, as she's a musical prodigy, and reported him there also. He did not return to my high school, and as far as I'm aware, did not graduate from our local college either. It later turned out that the fiancé, who continued to appear at games and practices with the flag twirlers, had heard about something about him targeting me from those girls. I hadn't known how obvious his attention was, but rumors had been flying. So much that barely anyone questioned the reason for his sudden absence. From what I understand, She initially stayed with him, but the engagement was eventually broken, and she never really looked me directly in the eye after that. All of that to say this: it frightens me to remember how casually other teenage girls responded to their witnessing his behavior towards me. Some girls even showed hints of jealousy, which makes me sad to remember. Some teenage girls can become so desensitized to the inappropriate attentions and advances of boys and men. They giggle and joke and relate to the creeped out feeling, sometimes missing the subtle red flag that indicates a situation is becoming dangerous. If my sister had not given me a safe space to say how he really made me feel, who knows how much further that situation could have escalated. I hope you already talk to the teenage girls in your life. Be their safe person with no judgment if you can. This happened when I was 15 years old, and I'm 28 now. Back in the summer of 2010, my dad, my oldest brother and myself went on a road trip to Oklahoma. The trip was alright. My dad and brother would switch driving every few hours or so since we had no plans of stopping for the first night, and we wanted to make this long-ass trip a one-day travel. We were heading for a wedding. My cousin on my dad's side was getting married to this amazing woman on an Indian reservation. It was a pretty cool wedding, and the people from her tribe were some of the most friendliest and down-to-earth people I have ever met. A day before the wedding, I was getting ready for the day in the cabin that my cousin rented for us. My brother at the time was super into BMX, and since we had a whole day to do whatever, he suggested we go to the closest dirt bike shop and look around. I go with him because I had nothing else to do. My dad was hanging out with my uncle, and being the only teenager, I decided to go with my brother. We drive to this bike shop maybe 40 minutes away from where we're staying on the reservation, and we get to the shop, and there was only one person working there. The person was the owner, a tall, thin, 60-something-year-old man who had little hair, a beard, and ugly teeth. He was a pretty greasy-looking guy, but I was with my brother, so thought nothing of it. He starts chatting us up, giving little glances at me while talking with my brother. My brother was pretty oblivious to this, as was I, and continued talking to the guy about bikes that he had and whatnot. So my brother was walking around looking at the different bikes while I look at the clothing part of the store. The clothes and bike racks were on completely different sides with a bunch of bike shirts in the middle. The creepy guy noticed I was alone and took the opportunity to try and talk to me. He was pretty nice. He was asking me little questions like where I'm from, am I in school, and the questions were getting weird. He asked me if I had a boyfriend, and I stupidly told him no, and that I was in the process of a breakup. So he starts telling me that guys are dogs, and that if I were his girl, he would treat me like a princess and spoil me with love and affection. He asked me how old I was, and I told him I was 15. By this point I was starting to get a weird feeling, and started to glance around for my brother. The creep was not in the least bothered by my age. He started telling me that I looked so good I could easily pass for 18 or 21. He's looking me up and down, and started talking about how nice my legs looked when I was dressed in a big baggy t-shirt and shorts, and that the big shirt hid my delicious figure. My brother catches the last thing he said and walked up and said, "You know she's 15, right?" And he laughed and said, "Oh, well, sorry, I thought she was 18. I glanced at my brother with an uneasy expression, and he put down what he wanted to buy on the counter and told me to head to the car and wait for him. The guy then tried to stall us from leaving and told my brother that if he could leave me with him for like 15 minutes, he would give him a bike for free. My brother declines and tells him we need to go. The creep then tells my brother and myself that if I tried on bikinis and modeled them, he would give them to me for free as well. This upset my brother, and he told him to just ring us up, and that we had to leave, and turns to me, hands me his keys, and signals with his head for me to get out. I head out, and as I leave, the guy quickly rings up my brother, gives him the stuff for free, and followed him out of the store with a stuffed animal in his hand. I had the car door open, as it was really hot and the AC wasn't fantastic. He keeps talking to my brother but walks straight to me. I ratted him, hands in the car and car door, caging me in the car, as he tried to pass me a stuffed duck plush as something to remember him by. He keeps trying to lean in and get closer to my face, but my brother starts yelling at him to get the hell away from me, walks around to my side and slams the door shut. The creep puts his hands up in surrender and told my brother he just wanted to give me a gift in hopes we would return. My brother grumbled something and got in the car, and as we got away I tossed the duck out the window, and my brother told me we were never going there again. What an absolute creep. We didn't think much of it afterwards, but it still creeped us out, and to the greasy as hell bike shop owner, let's never meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's scary stories in the rain. It's definitely a fun little thing to do from time to time. If you'd like even more of these, let me know, and maybe I'll do one next week as well. But for now, stay awesome. Huge thank you to all my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen, and if you'd like some bonus perks, your name at the end of the video, and a bunch of cool other stuff, you can follow the links in the description to find out more. Until next time, more video links on screen. Stay awesome. We'll see you in the next one. Good night.